Good evening, I'm Chris Glover. Allen Gardens is looking very different this evening. The longtime encampment there is mostly gone after city crews cleared it out today. Police were there to support, but it wasn't a volatile situation like we've seen during past encampment clearings. Dale Manukduk has more on what happened to the people who have been living in the park.
Piece by piece and in front of police, this landmark structure at the Allen Gardens homeless encampment was stripped away. It took nearly 2 years to build. At its peak last summer, there was roughly 100 tents pitched in the park. The city says it's been engaging people for 450 days straight, trying to get them indoors.
So over the last approximately 18 months, we've been able to move over 400 people into indoor spaces, into shelters, and of those, about 100 have been housed.
It's all part of the city's enhanced outreach model, a departure from police strength used in the past to clear out encampments at Trinity Bellwoods and Lamport Stadium in 2021, when officers came face to face with the unhoused and their supporters, in some cases resulting in violence. The new strategy still leaves room, however, to clear parks out.
One case, it's for health and safety reasons, and that might be an immediate removal, for example, a fire or something like that. And then the other avenue that it provides for when something like this might be needed is when all options have been exhausted, when people have been repeatedly offered shelter space, repeatedly offered housing and additional supports, and are declining.
Of the 11 people who were still living at Allen Gardens to start the day, 9 were referred indoors and 2 refused. The city says it's moving its enhanced outreach resources to other parks in Toronto and will not allow any new encampment to be set up at Allen Gardens. Residents in the area are concerned with the city's homelessness crisis.
Every day I say hi, so seeing them being displaced, it is sad. However, again, I do want to see a permanent solution, not for the safety of them and the safety of the residents that live in the neighborhood.
It's a very hard deal to deal with. The question is, where do we put all the homeless people?
In a statement, Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow writes in part, "I'm committed to finding permanent solutions so people can have a secure place to sleep and live. We need to build more affordable homes so everyone can have the dignity of a safe, secure, and affordable home in this city."
These sacred fire structures, those will not be touched as part of this work. But as for the structures that remain, there's one large one on the east side of the park and one large tent as well. The city said that some people asked for a couple of additional days to get their stuff out of the park.
Dale Manukduk, CBC News, Toronto.
2 young people have been arrested in connection with a shooting at a Jewish elementary school last week. It happened on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year in the Jewish calendar.
We're not sure right now what the motivation is. I can assure you that if we find evidence, motivation that this is motivated by hate, we will explore the aggravating nature of this with our partners in the ministry.
Shots were fired at Beis Chaya Mushka School for Girls in the early morning hours on Saturday. There were no injuries, but this is the second time shots were fired at the school. A 20-year-old man and a 17-year-old boy now face multiple charges, including possession of an unauthorized firearm and possession of property obtained by crime. In the Beaches neighborhood, a 3-alarm fire early this morning nearly destroyed a home and damaged multiple others nearby.
Well, there's going to be extensive damage to all 3 of the homes that were involved, particularly the one in the middle, which looks like it's going to be a total gutted. But the other structures on the other side of those seem to be fine.
Crews were called to a semi-detached residence on Kippen Davie Avenue near Woodbine and Queen E shortly before 4 a.m. They arrived to find the home engulfed in flames. It eventually reached 3-alarm status, resulting in 32 fire trucks being sent to the scene. One person was treated for minor injuries, but all 5 people within the heavily damaged home made it out safely. Toronto Police Superintendent Stacey Clark, who was handed a 2-year demotion this summer, is appealing that decision. Clark, the first black woman to reach the rank of superintendent in the service, pleaded guilty to misconduct last year in what has been described as a cheating scandal. She admitted to giving 6 young black constables confidential information ahead of promotional job interviews back in 2021. She called her actions a desperate attempt to fix what she said was anti-Black systemic racism in the force. In a notice of appeal, Clark, who was demoted to an inspector rank, said through her lawyer that the original hearing officer failed to give sufficient weight to her testimony during the hearing process. 20 Black organizations came together today to discuss solutions for what they call an ongoing crisis faced by African asylum seekers in Ontario. Every day, newcomers arrive escaping war, poverty, and violence, but many end up having to stay in crowded shelters or on the street. Brittany Billette was at today's conference and has more.
About half of people staying in city shelters are refugees, according to city stats, but many are turned away because most shelters are at or over capacity. Victor Akenda says when he arrived in Toronto, he wanted to rent a place, but was told to go to a shelter that ended up turning him away.
To me, it's all about laying the foundation so that people don't go through what we went through. Let our experience be the solution to the rest that are going to come after us. Because nobody deserves this.
So we are hoping to continue pushing.
The African Canadian Collective came together Friday to identify support gaps, tackle anti-Black racism, and housing inequality.
I know that across the city, everybody is experiencing this housing crunch. So we're not saying that there's one group that should be ahead of another group. What we're saying is let's fix the problem and let's create a pathway for transitional housing for those that are unhoused. And from that point, let's create a pathway for housing for those that need it.
In the last year, at least 2 asylum seekers from Africa died outside an Ontario shelter, including Delphina Njiji, a mother of 4 from Kenya.
You can't help but place yourself and think, what would I do and how would I feel, and have that empathy. And I think we all need that, and that may be missing amongst some people, particularly when we're talking about African asylum seekers.
One of the solutions the conference discussed today was the possibility of creating a Black-run shelter that has culturally competent support and wraparound services to assist asylum seekers with settlement.
We need to do this ourselves. Our hands have to be in it, and our hearts are already in it. And so I think we need to be part of that solution.
Organizers say the next step is to take what they've discussed here and draft specific policy demands to present to various levels of government. Brittany Billette, CBC News, Toronto.
Mayors of Ontario's largest cities are meeting in Markham today on how to address homelessness in their communities. And Clara Pasica is covering the meeting for us. Clara, what did we hear today?
Well, Chris, one of the most contentious motions heading into today was one concerning mandatory mental health treatment. Now, these motions come after another meeting that Ontario's big city mayors had during the summer, in which they identified homelessness, addictions, and mental health as a crisis in their community that they needed more tools from the provincial government to address. So these motions were hashed out here at the Markham Civic Centre, where this meeting was being held. They spent several hours working on the motions to reach a consensus, but the hope is that the motions that they've come up with today will help them address the challenges they face. Alex Nuttall is the mayor of Barrie. Here's what he had to say about his hopes.
We need to see some more movement on mandatory treatment. There are individuals who are in our community that are struggling immensely. In some cases, they're potentially a harm to themselves. In other cases, they're potentially a harm to those around them. And in some cases, both. And so, what our caucus was able to do today was to say, yes, this needs to be looked at as part of the greater strategy, and we need the province to bring in the experts to be able to determine where those lines should be drawn.
Now, that motion that he's speaking of asks the province to review the Mental Health Act and the Healthcare Consent Act in consultation with healthcare professionals to decide if this is the right direction that the province should go, introducing more mandatory mental health care. Other motions that also passed to have the province take on intervener status in some of the cases that we've been seeing coming through the courts when that the cities have wanted to end an encampment, also asking the provincial and federal governments to introduce legislation prohibiting open and public drug use and drinking, and to better resource compassionate care and treatment programs. So certainly those are their big hopes. We asked the Premier what he was going to do about it, a spokesperson for him saying, people are rightfully frustrated with encampments. We shouldn't have individuals squatting on public land. As the Premier has indicated, we're exploring all legal tools available to the province to restore public safety by clearing these encampments and moving individuals into safe, stable housing. Now, the Premier has recently indicated that, there might be some support for some of these things, and we'll have the chance to find out when the legislature resumes next week.
Clara Pasica there reporting. Now to Quebec, where details were revealed today of a proposed settlement between tobacco companies, provinces, territories, and tens of thousands of smokers. The multi-billion-dollar deal was decades in the making. Jennifer Yoon has more from Montreal.
$32 billion paid out by 3 major tobacco companies to smokers diagnosed with lung cancer, throat cancer, or emphysema, as well as provinces and territories to recover healthcare costs. If the proposed plan is accepted, it would be the biggest deal of its kind outside the United States.
When we started this case in 1998, not a single person in the world had received a single penny from a tobacco company in compensation. And as a result of this litigation, tens of thousands of Canadians will receive very significant awards.
This is the result of a legal battle that's been going on for decades. The Quebec class action lawsuit was filed in 1998, involving smokers that got seriously sick or couldn't quit. The plaintiffs won the case in 2015. It just took this long for the potential payout because the companies were seeking creditor protection. If this proposed plan is accepted, the plaintiffs would file claims for compensation up to $100,000 each. But many of the class action members have died already, so their successors will be eligible for the compensation.
Obviously, our loved ones won't come back from the dead, but at least it gives us some kind of justice, some kind of closure.
The proposed plan also includes more than $25 billion for provinces and territories recouping health costs, as well as $2.5 billion for smokers in other provinces diagnosed with some cancers between 2015 and 2019. It must be voted on by creditors no later than December 12th and approved by the court. Jennifer Yoon, CBC News, Montreal.
It is World Menopause Day, and menopause, obviously a transition period in women's lives that is often surrounded by stigma and misunderstanding. But one Toronto hospital is trying to raise money for a center dedicated to researching menopause. Naima Weingarten has the full story.
At first, Deborah Knight didn't know what was wrong. After her surgery to treat uterine cancer launched her into menopause, nothing felt the same.
It was like a tap just went off, and I just didn't know how I could function. I wasn't the real me anymore. Like the Deborah that I know, she had left my body.
Despite half the world's population set to experience it, patients and physicians say there's still stigma surrounding menopause, with the entire subject widely considered as under-researched and underfunded.
I think it's because our society focuses a lot on puberty and fertility, young adulthood, motherhood.
According to the Menopause Foundation of Canada, 1 in 10 women leave the workforce because of unmanaged menopause symptoms.
Why aren't we talking about this stuff? Why aren't we talking about the health symptoms, the anxiety and depression that can just fall on you when you're not expecting it?
Sinai Health, where Deborah was treated, is launching a new center to answer some of these questions and help more people get care.
Sorry, I'm hot.
In a campaign called Hot and Bothered, their foundation is trying to raise $50 million to transform the clinic they have for mature women into a 25,000 square feet facility.
We do hope that our model, which we think is the most comprehensive center of its kind in Canada and most likely in the world, once it comes to fruition, it is something that others may adopt and want to follow suit as well.
They already secured a lease for the center, which Louis says will also be used to research menopause and teach medical professionals and patients how to manage it.
Think about sexual health, for instance, as women go through menopause. Think about patients that had cancer that go through menopause, different symptoms. They need different type of cares. There's a real gap in the system here. There's a gap in terms of education. There's a gap in terms of clinical care.
A gap that Dr. Marie Christakis has seen firsthand.
There are some women who have been waiting 2 years to speak with a menopause specialist. And by the time that they're actually speaking with one of us, I think really the height of their symptoms has already passed.
So far, Sinai raised $29 million for the Center for Mature Women's Health, which they say will double the number of patients they're able to see every year and reduce wait times. The center is expected to open sometime within the next 2 years. Nama Weingarten, CBC News, Toronto.
Provincial politicians will be back at Queen's Park next week, and you should get ready for what could be a combative session at the legislature after a long break and a potential early election call on the way. And Queen's Park reporter Lorenda Redekop is going to be watching all of it for us. Lorenda, what are you going to be watching for first?
Well, right away, first day back, the transportation bill that we've been telling people about is going to be tabled. That's the one that will restrict new bike lanes if a lane of traffic is removed. Just today, the Premier reposted part of his speech from yesterday at the Empire Club, and that's where he talks about their plans for bike lanes. And Ford went further than what his transportation minister had said earlier in the week.
It isn't enough to keep an eye on future bike lanes. We need to and will remove and replace existing bike lanes on primary roads that are bringing traffic in our cities to an absolute standstill.
And so when that legislation is tabled, we'll be watching for whether that's part of the bill or if this is just what the Premier wants, but it's not the official policy. What we'd heard from the minister is that they want to see the data on current bike lanes started in the past 5 years. In the internal briefing documents we received and first reported on last month, they show that the government sees this as part of making life easier for drivers. Over the years, this government has offered a number of different goodies for drivers. We think of cutting the gas tax and the driver's license fees. There is, of course, one new goodie we'll be watching for that's for everyone. That will be at the end of the month with the fall economic statement and those checks of at least $200 for every Ontarian. We know that the opposition parties all see that as an attempt to buy votes.
Yeah, in the last few days, the opposition parties have certainly had a lot to say about those checks that will be coming out. But what else are you expecting to see from the opposition parties?
Well, I'm expecting that question period could get pretty spicy. We haven't heard from those opposition parties. They haven't been able to ask the government questions for 19 weeks now, and that's a really unusually long break. All the parties, they seem to be in pre-campaign mode with a possible early election call coming, perhaps in the spring. And we've heard from the opposition parties and their priorities and questions.
How much is it really going to cost for his dream of building a tunnel under the 401? How much is Highway 413 going to cost? When is the Premier actually going to end hallway medicine, which he promised in 2018?
Hold this government to account on all these boondoggles and boozdoggles and mega spa, mega scams, holding their feet to the fire because the people of Ontario are really concerned.
She also mentioned 2.5 million people not having a family doctor and the need for more housing.
Okay, how about the official opposition, the NDP? What are you expecting from them?
Well, the past couple days, Leader Marit Stiles, she's been outside Toronto, in Windsor yesterday, Ottawa today, areas where they'd like to win seats. They've also launched an ad campaign. Mainly, it's focused on her name and face front and center, obviously trying to make sure that people know who she is. But there's also an attack there on the Premier, and they also have a video version.
You deserve to be able to pay your rent and afford groceries.
My dream is to be able to afford a home in the city I love.
The last thing that's free these days is walking and breathing.
I want a Premier who cares about me and my neighbors as much as I do.
In contrast, Ford and his PCs, they've had a much bigger advertising campaign that's been going on for months, showing the Premier calling people back, talking about what his government has done.
And Lorenda, it's not just the parties that you're paying attention to. There's another player that isn't affiliated with a party, but is also getting into advertising.
That's right. So this is a group called Ontario Forward. They're criticizing Doug Ford, and I was sent a link to their website by a longtime Liberal strategist who was also behind the third-party group Working Families Coalition. Now, this is a separate group, nonpartisan. Here's a snippet from one of their ads, which just started airing this week.
It's time to put an end to Ford's policy of handing out favors to his rich buddies. Doug Ford, a choice we cannot afford.
And they plan to ramp up their campaign over the coming weeks and months.
It'll be interesting to see where all this goes, especially with an election potentially around the corner. Lorenda Redekop joining us in studio. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Time now for a check on weather with Colette. And Colette, what do you think? Is this the last weekend of October that we're going to have in the 20s?
I'm not ready to say that. I do think we're getting close, though. I think we're probably getting there where it may be the last run that we have, Chris. But I'll tell you what, enjoy it. And yes, I know we're going to get into a cool down by about mid or the end of next week, but who knows? We could have another resurgence coming at us. Look at today's highs, about 5 degrees above normal for the daytime highs for Toronto with 18. We should be at 13. By the time we get to Monday, we're going to be close to 10 degrees above seasonal with our daytime highs and some warming overnight lows as well. All the active weather is in northwestern Ontario and stretches back towards the Rockies. And with that, you think, okay, the weather travels from west to east in this hemisphere. We're going to see that chugging on in here. But you know what? Not exactly. Because what's going to happen with this cold front, because this ridge is just so strong, is that it goes from being vertical to nearly horizontal and has to go around this ridge. And what does that mean? It means it takes the inclement weather with it, the cloud cover and the showers and the cooler temperatures. So all that's going into northern Ontario. Sorry for those folks there, but for the lower Great Lakes, southern Ontario, eastern Ontario, it means the continuation of some very nice weather conditions. Clear skies at night, a bit of patchy fog certainly possible tonight, but sunshine during the days as well. So a look at the overnight temperatures for tonight. By tomorrow will be around 5-6 degrees in the GTA. Something I do want to point out, I know we've got runners kind of gearing up this weekend for the 5K tomorrow morning. By the time we reach 9 o'clock, I mean, it heats up pretty quickly. We'll be around 8 to certainly 10 degrees by 10 o'clock. And the wind's fairly light. Now, on Sunday morning, I would say we're easily at 10 degrees by the time we're at 9 o'clock. So, think about that. A little more of a breeze closer to the lakeshore, but still some pretty nice conditions coming our way. And how about these for the daytime highs? I mentioned that warming trend even further towards Monday. So 20 for Saturday, 21 Sunday, double digits for the overnight lows by the time we get into the beginning of next week. And then finally, the ridge breaks down by about mid next week and it cools down for Thursday.
Probably just in time for Halloween, hey?
There, I know. Isn't that always the case, right?
Always the case. All right. Thank you, Colette.
You're welcome.
And that's our show for tonight. Thanks so much for watching.